This exam skills screencast will show you how to answer the 20-mark question on the social differentiation and stratification section of the component 3 A-level sociology exam. So the title of the component 3 exam is called Power and Stratification. It's a 2.5-hour exam paper and it's worth 40% of your overall A-level grade, and it has 2 sections to it. Section B covers the work that we've done on world sociology, and Section A is on social differentiation and stratification, or inequality in the UK. And we can see on the screen at the moment the layout for this first section, Section A, of the component 3 exam. And the focus of this specific screencast is going to be on this compulsory 20-mark question, which is the first question that appears on the exam paper. And in terms of time management, I recommend that you spend around about 20 to 25 minutes on the compulsory 20-mark question. Now, the good thing about this 20-mark question on Section A of Component 3 is it's the most predictable question that appears on any of the sociology exams. So the wording of the question is predictable. The command for the question will ask you to identify evidence of some form of inequality in 2 areas of life in the contemporary UK. Remember that the term contemporary simply means nowadays. So the evidence that you include in your answer needs to be reasonably up to date. Now, in terms of the type of inequality that you need to focus on, this will normally be specified in the question. So the question will normally ask you either to identify evidence of gender inequality in 2 areas of life in the contemporary UK, or it will be worded in exactly the same way, but it will say identify evidence of social class inequality in 2 areas of life in the contemporary UK, or it will ask you to identify evidence of ethnic inequality, or it will ask you to identify evidence of age inequality. The only other type of question that they might ask would be a question that simply says inequality without specifying either gender, social class, ethnicity or age. And if they ask you this more general question, this gives you the freedom to pick and choose whichever form of inequality you wish to focus on. So you can simply select either gender, class, ethnicity or age if the question simply says inequality. Now, to score highly in this section of the exam, the evidence that you include in this particular answer needs to refer to named sources of data. So you can't just use anecdotal evidence. You've got to be really specific and learn named sources of data, and the points that you make in your answer, the evidence that you use, needs to be developed to explain why it provides clear evidence of inequality. What you can see at the top of this slide are the 5 possible questions that could come up on this section of component 3. So this really is the most predictable part of the exam, because the question is either going to be about gender inequality, ethnic inequality, age inequality, social class inequality, or this more general question where they simply say inequality. Now, in terms of the 2 areas of life, what I'm suggesting and the notes that I prepared for you focus on the following 2 areas of life in the contemporary UK. Politics, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then also the media, because the media is a topic that you've got to revise for component 1 anyway. So I've chosen politics as one of the areas of life alongside the media that you should focus on, because in relation to politics, it is very easy to demonstrate all of the different forms of inequality: class, gender, age, and ethnicity. Because if you look at our political institutions, they tend to be dominated by people from a fairly narrow social background. So, for example, what you can see on this particular slide is a photograph of the House of Commons. The House of Commons is the most powerful part of the UK Parliament, and it's the main lawmaking body within British society, and we elect 650 members of Parliament to make law on our behalf in this particular institution. Now, if you look at this photo just for a moment, you can visibly see the issue of unequal representation. That if we look at the House of Commons, overwhelmingly, for example, most of the people here are men, most of the people are white, and most of the people are relatively old. So we clearly have an issue of political inequality in terms of this unequal representation. So because this is a fairly predictable section of the exam, you should be aiming to get maximum or close to maximum marks. And to help you do that, I prepared some very comprehensive revision notes that you need to learn by heart in order to hopefully get maximum marks in the exam. So on my revision notes, I cover all of the different types of inequality, so class, age, gender, or ethnicity. So I use this mnemonic CAGE to remind you of the 4 forms of inequality that you need to learn. I provide you with specific named pieces of evidence, because as I said earlier, it's important not just to be anecdotal. So you've got specific references to studies and pieces of evidence in this column. And then what you've got to do with the evidence is you've got to clearly explain exactly how the evidence shows inequality. And that's what I've done in this other column. And in this example that we can see on the screen at the moment, you've got notes here on social class inequality. This is the section that focuses on politics. And what I've done here is I've provided you with 3 different sources of evidence that you can use in the exam. Now, you only need 2 pieces of evidence. So the reason that I've included 3 sources of evidence here is just to give you a little bit of flexibility in terms of what you want to learn and what you want to leave out. Okay, you need 2 pieces of evidence for each area of life. So remember that the exam question will ask you to focus on 2 areas of social life. So in addition to politics, you need also to look at the media. And again, this is about social class. And once again, you can leave out one of these sections. So I've given you a bit more than you need here, just to give you some flexibility in terms of your revision. But it would be fine, for example, to ignore evidence number 1, but simply to learn evidence number 2 and evidence number 3, because 2 pieces of evidence per area of social life is enough to get maximum marks. So here we got the evidence, and then once again, in addition to describing the evidence, you've also got to explain and interpret the evidence and say how it demonstrates inequality. So that's what you've got in this last column. And obviously in the notes that I prepared for you, in addition to looking at class, we've got age, we've got gender, we've got ethnic inequalities, so that you've got comprehensive evidence that you can use for any type of 20-mark question that comes up in the exam. And when you're answering this question in the exam, you don't need an introduction or a conclusion. You simply need to use the material from this handout. So for example, if the question was about class inequality, you would have one paragraph where you would describe and then interpret your first bit of evidence about the media, for example. Then you would do the same with your second piece of evidence. So you would have another paragraph where you described and then interpreted the evidence, and then you would do exactly the same for the two pieces of evidence for the other area of social life, which was the material on politics on the previous slide. Now in class I'll be giving out a hard copy of the handout that you need to prepare for this 20-mark question, but I'll also be putting an electronic version of the handout onto iLearn, and you'll be able to find it in this particular section of iLearn, the practice exam questions section of iLearn. And remember, once you've read through the handout a couple of times, then the most effective way of revising that material and making sure that it's in your memory for the exam is not to endlessly reread and highlight, but to focus on testing yourself as often as possible, because retrieval practice spaced out over time is the most effective way of remembering things for any exam.